Section 1. The Echoes of a Past War and the Vision of a Quiet Inventor. In the quiet corridors of the Springfield Armory in Massachusetts, long after the great conflict had ended, the echoes of its lessons still resonated. The world had witnessed a struggle on an industrial scale, a maelstrom of steel and fire that had redefined the very nature of conflict. Yet, for all the advancements in aviation, armor, and artillery, the individual infantryman, the heart of any army, was still largely equipped with a technology that would have been familiar to his grandfather. He carried a bolt-action rifle, a reliable and accurate tool, but one that demanded a deliberate manual action for every single shot. Each time a soldier fired, he had to break his sight picture, work a bolt, eject a spent casing, chamber a new round, and reacquire his target. This rhythmic, mechanical process, repeated millions of times across the muddy fields of Europe, dictated the pace and flow of infantry engagements. It was a world of carefully aimed single shots, where firepower was the domain of the heavy, crew-served machine gun, not the common rifleman. This prevailing military doctrine, etched into the minds of generals and tacticians across the globe, was built upon a foundation of fire discipline and marksmanship. The rifleman was a marksman first and foremost. His role was to deliver precise, effective fire, not to saturate an area with projectiles. The idea of entrusting every soldier with a weapon capable of rapid, semi-automatic fire was seen by many as not just unnecessary, but wasteful and even dangerous. It would encourage poor marksmanship, they argued, and lead to a logistical nightmare of ammunition consumption. The soldier, it was believed, would simply squander his rounds, leaving him vulnerable at the critical moment. This was the world, the established order of military thought, into which a quiet, unassuming Canadian-born engineer named John Cantius Garand stepped. He was not a hardened general or a seasoned combat veteran, but a man of gears and springs, of blueprints and tolerances. His battlefield was the workshop. His adversaries were mechanical challenges and the inertia of tradition. Working within the storied walls of the Springfield Armory, an institution that had armed American soldiers for generations, Garand harbored a revolutionary vision. He saw a future where the individual soldier was not merely a single-shot marksman, but a source of formidable and continuous firepower. He envisioned a rifle that would bridge the gap between the slow, deliberate bolt action and the cumbersome, heavy machine gun. It would be a weapon that retained the accuracy and power of a traditional rifle, but freed the soldier from the tyranny of the bolt. With such a tool, a soldier could maintain focus on his target, delivering follow-up shots as fast as he could pull the trigger. He could suppress an enemy position, support the advance of his comrades, and react to sudden threats with an immediacy that was simply impossible with the old system. The concept was not entirely new. Inventors had been experimenting with self-loading rifles for decades. However, none had managed to create a design that was simple, rugged, and reliable enough for the brutal realities of military service. Early, semi-automatic designs were often complex, prone to jamming from dirt and fouling, and too heavy or expensive for mass production. They were mechanical novelties, not practical instruments of war. The challenge was immense: to design a rifle that could withstand the mud, rain, and grit of the battlefield, that could be easily maintained by a soldier with minimal training, and that could be manufactured by the millions. It had to be powerful enough to be effective at long ranges, yet manageable enough for the average soldier to control. This was the puzzle that consumed John Garand for nearly 15 years. He was a methodical and patient man, toiling away in his workshop, refining his designs through countless prototypes and iterations. He experimented with different operating mechanisms, from primer-actuated systems to complex gas trap designs, each with its own set of strengths and weaknesses. His work was not a single stroke of genius, but a long, arduous process of elimination, of solving one small problem at a time. He faced skepticism from the military establishment and competition from other designers, each convinced their own approach was superior. Yet, Garand persisted, driven by his conviction that the future of the infantryman depended on this technological leap. He was not designing a mere replacement for the old Springfield 1903 rifle. He was forging a new doctrine in steel and wood. He was crafting a tool that would fundamentally alter the balance of power on the battlefield, giving the individual soldier an unprecedented level of agency and lethality. This quiet revolution, happening behind the closed doors of a government armory, went largely unnoticed by the wider world. While nations debated treaties and built massive warships, the seeds of the next conflict's defining infantry weapon were being sown in the mind of one brilliant, determined engineer. The world was still thinking in terms of single shots, while John Garand was thinking in a new rhythm, a new cadence of 8. The rifle he was perfecting would not just be a new piece of equipment. It would become a symbol of a new kind of soldier and a new way of waging war, a change that would be felt with startling force on battlefields a world away. Section 2. The Heart of the Machine, Forging the M1. The culmination of John Garand's relentless pursuit of perfection was a rifle of elegant simplicity and brutal effectiveness. Officially designated as the U.S. rifle, caliber .30 M1, it was a masterpiece of industrial design, a harmonious blend of forged steel and black walnut that was as reliable as it was revolutionary. At its core lay a robust and ingenious gas-operated system. When a round was fired, a small amount of the propellant gas was bled off from the barrel through a tiny port near the muzzle. This gas was channeled into a cylinder, where it pushed a long operating rod rearward. This single movement of the rod accomplished a whole symphony of mechanical actions. It unlocked the rotating bolt, extracted and ejected the spent cartridge casing, cocked the hammer for the next shot, and then, under pressure from a spring, flew forward again, stripping a fresh round from the magazine and chambering it, locking the bolt securely in place. The entire cycle was completed in a fraction of a second, faster than the human mind could consciously register. To the soldier holding it, the process was seamless. A pull of the trigger resulted in a powerful shot, a firm recoil, and a rifle instantly ready to fire again. This mechanism was the engine of the Garand's power. But the soul of the machine, the feature that truly set it apart, was its unique feeding system. Instead of a traditional internal magazine fed by loose rounds or a stripper clip, the M1 utilized an 8-round en-bloc clip. This was a small, rectangular piece of sheet metal that held 8 rounds of the potent .30-06 Springfield cartridge in a staggered column. To load the rifle, the soldier would pull the operating rod to the rear, locking the bolt open. He would then take a full clip and, with a firm push of the thumb, press it down into the internal magazine from the top. The moment the clip was fully seated, the bolt would be released, slamming forward with a satisfying clack to chamber the first round. The rifle was now ready. This system was the key to its rapid reloading and its ability to maintain a high rate of fire. A soldier could expend 8 rounds and, in a matter of seconds, have another 8 ready to go. The clip itself remained inside the rifle, feeding cartridges upward until the very last one was fired. And it was this final, 8th shot that produced one of the most iconic and debated sounds of the entire conflict. Upon firing the last round, the now empty en-bloc clip was automatically ejected from the rifle with a distinctive, high-pitched ping as it struck the operating rod or the ground. This sound, a clear announcement that the rifle was empty, would become inextricably linked with the M1, a sonic signature known on every front where American soldiers fought. The ammunition it fired, the .30-06 Springfield, was a powerful, full-sized rifle cartridge, a holdover from the bolt-action era that gave the M1 tremendous reach and impact. It was capable of delivering effective fire out to 500 yards and beyond, ensuring that the semi-automatic capability did not come at the expense of range or power. This meant an American infantry squad was not just formidable in close-quarters combat, but could also dominate the medium to long engagement distances, typical of European battlefields. When the M1 was officially adopted by the U.S. Army in 1936, it marked a pivotal moment in military history. For the first time, a major world power was committing to equipping its standard infantrymen with a semi-automatic rifle as their primary issue weapon. It was a bold and forward-thinking decision, but it was not without its critics. Traditionalists within the military establishment remained skeptical. They clung to the old doctrines of aimed, deliberate fire, fearing that the M1's high rate of fire would lead to spray and pray tactics and an unsustainable consumption of ammunition. Early versions of the rifle also had their teething problems, particularly with the initial gas trap system, which proved less reliable than the later, more familiar gas port design. These early issues fueled the arguments of the naysayers and slowed the rifle's initial production and distribution. For a time, it seemed as though Garand's vision might be compromised or even abandoned in favor of maintaining the status quo. The first few years of its service life were a period of trial and refinement. The rifle was put through its paces in grueling Army exercises, from the humid swamps of the South to the cold, dusty plains of the West. Soldiers had to be retrained, not just in the mechanics of the new weapon, but in a new philosophy of fire. Sergeants and officers had to learn how to manage and leverage the vastly increased firepower now available at the squad level. The logistical chain, from the factories to the front lines, had to adapt to the higher demand for .30-06 ammunition. This was more than just a new rifle. It was a new system, and implementing it across an entire army was a monumental undertaking. By the late 1930s, as the world slid inexorably toward another global conflict, the United States was quietly and methodically building an army around a rifle that most of its future adversaries had fundamentally underestimated or dismissed as impractical. They could not yet know that the painstaking work of John Garand and the forward-thinking decision of the Ordnance Department had given their soldiers a tool that would soon prove to be a decisive, battle-winning advantage. The sound of the future was not the roar of a cannon or the drone of an airplane. It was the steady, rhythmic report of a semi-automatic rifle, punctuated by the sharp, metallic ping of an empty clip. Section 3. A Doctrine of Precision, the Carabiner. 98 K. Across the Atlantic, in the resurgent and rapidly rearming nation of Germany, the philosophy of the infantryman was shaped by a different history and a different set of priorities. The German military tradition, forged in the crucible of the First World War, placed its faith not in the firepower of the individual rifleman, but in the overwhelming dominance of the crew-served machine gun. The doctrine of the German infantry squad, or Gruppe, was built around the Maschinengewehr, first the MG-34 and later the legendary MG-42. This weapon, capable of firing over 1,000 rounds per minute, was the heart and soul of their tactical thinking. It was the base of fire, the tool that would pin the enemy in place, suppress their movements, and create the openings for maneuver. The riflemen in the squad, typically 7 or 8 strong, were there to support the machine gun. Their role was to protect its flanks, to carry extra ammunition, and to engage targets that the machine gun could not. Their primary weapon was a reflection of this supporting role, the Carabiner 98 Kurz, or K98K. This rifle was the epitome of bolt-action design, the final and most refined evolution of a lineage stretching back to the 19th century. It was a beautiful piece of engineering, renowned for its accuracy, its robust construction, and its utter reliability. Chambered for the powerful 7.92 by 57 mm Mauser cartridge, the K98K was a formidable and respected weapon, capable of precise shots at very long ranges. In the hands of a well-trained German soldier, it was an instrument of exceptional precision. However, it was still a bolt-action rifle. Each and every shot required the soldier to manually cycle the bolt, a four-step process: lift, pull back, push forward, lock down. A skilled soldier could perhaps manage 15 aimed shots in a minute, but a more realistic sustained rate of fire was closer to 10. The rifle was fed from a 5-round internal magazine, which was typically reloaded using a 5-round stripper clip. This process, while efficient for a bolt-action system, was still a significant pause in a soldier's ability to engage the enemy. The entire German tactical system was built around the limitations and strengths of this weapon combination. Since the rifleman could not provide a high volume of fire, the machine gun did that job. The riflemen were trained to be exceptional marksmen, to make every one of their 5 shots count. Fire discipline was paramount. Ammunition was to be conserved, shots were to be carefully aimed, and the role of the rifleman was to eliminate specific, high-value targets, while the MG-42 controlled the battlefield. This philosophy was deeply ingrained. German military planners had certainly considered semi-automatic rifles. They had developed their own designs, such as the Gewehr 41 and later the Gewehr 43. However, these weapons were never produced in the same vast quantities as the K98K, and they were often plagued with reliability issues. They were typically issued in limited numbers to specialist troops or to supplement firepower at the squad level, but they never fully replaced the trusted bolt action as the standard infantry weapon. The K98K remained the symbol and the primary tool of the German Lancer from the first day of the war to the last. There was a logic to this conservatism. The German army favored proven, reliable technology. The K98K was a known quantity. It worked, it was accurate, and every soldier in the army knew how to use and maintain it. Furthermore, their tactical system, centered on the machine gun, was incredibly effective. Throughout the early years of the war, the combination of the MG-42 and the K98K had proven devastatingly successful, overwhelming opponents who were often armed with similar bolt-action rifles. They saw no pressing need for a radical change in their core infantry weapon. They believed their system of a single, overwhelming source of automatic fire, supported by precise riflemen, was the peak of infantry tactics. This created a fundamental difference in the firepower profile of a German and an American infantry squad. A German squad's power was concentrated in one point: the machine gun. If that gun was suppressed or taken out of action, the squad's overall firepower dropped dramatically, reducing it to a small group of slow-firing riflemen. An American squad, by contrast, had its firepower distributed. While they also employed machine guns, every single one of their riflemen carried a weapon capable of a high rate of semi-automatic fire. Every M1 Garand was, in essence, a base of fire in its own right. An American squad could lose its machine gun and still maintain a formidable volume of suppressive fire. This doctrinal and technological divergence set the stage for a dramatic confrontation. The German soldiers, confident in their proven tactics and their excellent weapons, were about to encounter an army where every soldier carried what they would come to perceive as a half-automatic rifle. They were prepared for a war of precise, single shots, punctuated by the terrifying chatter of a machine gun. They were not prepared for an enemy where every infantryman could return fire with a speed and ferocity that, until then, had been the exclusive domain of specialist weapons. The clash was not just between two rifles, but between two deeply rooted philosophies of war. One was a philosophy of concentrated power and precision. The other, a new philosophy of distributed, sustained firepower. On the battlefields of North Africa, Italy, and France, the stark reality of this difference would be written in the harsh language of combat. Section 4. A New Sound in the Desert Sands. November 1942. The arid, sun-scorched landscapes of North Africa. Operation Torch had landed thousands of American soldiers on a new and unfamiliar continent, thrusting them into their first major ground combat of the European theater. They were green troops, untested in the crucible of battle, facing the seasoned and confident veterans of the German Africa Corps. On paper, the forces were in many ways comparable, but the Americans carried a secret advantage, a tool whose true significance had not yet been fully appreciated by their opponents. It was here, in the swirling dust and the harsh, rocky terrain, that the M1 Garand would have its first large-scale baptism of fire. Imagine a German patrol, veterans of desert warfare, moving cautiously along a dry wadi. They are masters of their craft, their eyes scanning the terrain for any sign of movement. Their ears are attuned to the familiar sounds of the battlefield, the distant rumble of engines, the sharp crack of their own K98K rifles, and the menacing, cloth-ripping sound of their MG-34. Suddenly, they make contact with an American position. A single rifle shot echoes from a ridge. The German soldiers react with practiced discipline, taking cover and preparing to return fire. Their machine gunner sets up, ready to lay down a base of fire. The riflemen spread out, working their bolts, preparing to pick off the enemy one by one. They expect the typical rhythm of a firefight: a shot, a pause, another shot. Instead, what they hear is something entirely new and unsettling. From the position of that single American soldier comes not one shot, but a rapid succession of them. Bang, 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 bang. It is a steady, semi-automatic rhythm, a volume of fire that their minds instinctively associate with a machine gun, yet it lacks the blistering speed of an MG-34. It is coming from a single point, a single rifle. A German soldier peeks over his cover to return fire and is immediately driven back down by two more quick shots that thud into the rock near his head. He cannot understand how one man can fire so quickly and so accurately. Before his squad can properly organize a response, they hear the same rapid fire erupting from other points along the American line. It is not just one soldier. It seems that every American has this capability. The sheer volume of incoming fire is shocking. It pins them down, making it impossible for their own machine gunner to operate effectively without being targeted from multiple directions. The planned, methodical German response, built around the supremacy of their machine gun, begins to fall apart. The American soldiers, for their part, are discovering the power they hold. A young private, perhaps from Ohio or Texas, finds himself able to keep 2 or 3 enemy soldiers suppressed all by himself. He doesn't have to break his cheek weld to work a bolt. He can fire, see the puff of dust where his round impacts, adjust his aim, and fire again almost instantly. This allows his squad leader to maneuver another part of the team to a flanking position. The Garand is no longer just a rifle. It is a tool for control, for suppression, for enabling movement. In these early encounters, the Garand proved its mettle not just in firepower, but in reliability. The fine, abrasive sand of the desert is a notorious enemy of complex machinery. It works its way into every crack and crevice, causing mechanisms to jam and fail. Many had worried that the Garand's semi-automatic action would be too delicate for such a harsh environment. Yet, the rifle performed admirably. Its robust design and relatively simple construction meant that with basic maintenance, it continued to function reliably, while the tighter tolerances of some other weapons could lead to problems. The bolt-action K98K was also famously reliable, of course, but the Garand's ability to keep running under such conditions was a critical validation of John Garand's design philosophy. The psychological impact on the German soldiers was immediate and profound. They had been taught that they were the masters of modern warfare, equipped with the finest weapons. Now, they faced an enemy where every common soldier seemed to be armed with a special weapon. The experience was disorienting. Reports began to filter back through German channels, describing the Americans' self-loading rifle with a mixture of surprise and respect. The sound of the Garand became a source of dread. That steady, semi-automatic report meant that an American unit was nearby, and that any engagement would be a struggle against a hail of fire. The North African campaign was a brutal learning experience for the U.S. Army, filled with setbacks and hard-won lessons. But through it all, the M1 Garand emerged as an unqualified success. It had given the individual American soldier a clear and decisive advantage in the countless small unit actions that characterized the fighting. It proved that the concept of a standard-issue semi-automatic rifle was not just viable, but transformative. The quiet work of John Garand in his Springfield workshop was now echoing across the deserts of a distant continent, and the world was beginning to take notice. The initial flaw that some German soldiers might have perceived, a complex and perhaps wasteful weapon, was, in the crucible of combat, revealed to be its greatest strength. Section 5. The Whispers of an Unfair Fight. As the war ground on from the dusty hills of North Africa to the rugged mountains of Italy, the initial surprise experienced by German soldiers solidified into a grim recognition. The M1 Garand was not a fluke or a novelty weapon encountered in isolated skirmishes. It was the standard armament of a vast and growing American army. The whispers and battlefield reports from Tunisia became a consistent theme in German intelligence summaries and the letters written home by weary soldiers on the Italian front. They gave the American rifle a name born of respect and frustration: the Selbstladegewehr, the self-loading rifle. This wasn't just a technical description. It was a term loaded with implication. It implied a level of technological superiority at the individual level that the German army, for all its prowess, could not match. The concept of a fair fight, a duel between two equally armed riflemen, seemed to have been erased. A German soldier, with his 5-round bolt-action K98K, knew that after 5 shots he would face a critical, vulnerable pause as he reached for a stripper clip and reloaded. An American soldier with a Garand could send 8 rounds downrange and be reloaded and ready, with another 8 in the time it took the German to chamber his 6th round. This disparity in firepower had a corrosive psychological effect. It bred a sense of being perpetually outgunned, even when facing a numerically equal or smaller force. Captured German soldiers during interrogations frequently spoke of the Garand. They described the shock of seeing what they thought was a lone rifleman lay down a stream of fire so rapid and continuous that they had mistaken him for a light machine gun. They spoke of the futility of trying to advance against a line of American infantry, where every soldier could contribute to a wall of suppressive fire. It seemed to them a violation of the established rules of engagement, an almost unsporting advantage. The sentiment was captured in official German military analyses. The Heereswaffenamt, the German Army Weapons Agency, began to study the phenomenon. Their reports from 1943 and 1944 noted with clinical precision the tactical implications of the American rifle. One key observation was that American infantry units possess a significantly higher density of fire with fewer machine guns. This was a critical insight. The German system relied on the MG-42 as the focal point of its firepower. The American system, thanks to the Garand, distributed that firepower across every member of the squad. This made American units more flexible and less vulnerable. Neutralizing a single German machine gun could cripple a squad's offensive or defensive capability. Neutralizing a single American rifleman, however, did little to diminish the overall fire rate of his squad. Other German officers went further in their assessments, stating that in practical terms, every American infantryman was armed with half an automatic weapon. This wasn't hyperbole. It was a candid acknowledgement of the tactical reality they faced. The Garand bridged the gap between the rifle and the submachine gun. It had the range and power of a full-sized rifle, but a rate of fire that approached that of the German MP-40, albeit with far greater accuracy and effectiveness at a distance. This unfair advantage forced German units to adapt their tactics. They learned to be even more reliant on their machine guns, to use them with greater skill to suppress the swarms of Garand-armed riflemen. They emphasized infiltration and surprise, hoping to close the distance and engage the Americans before the full weight of their semi-automatic fire could be brought to bear. But these were reactive measures, attempts to compensate for a fundamental technological gap. The frustration was palpable, not just in official reports, but in the personal accounts of the soldiers themselves. A German veteran of the fighting in Italy later recalled, "We would be in a good defensive position, and the Americans would attack. We would fire, work the bolt, fire again. In the time we fired 2 shots, we would have 5 or 6 coming at us. It was very demoralizing. It felt like we were throwing stones against a tidal wave." This perception of the Garand as an overwhelming force had a tangible impact on morale. It contributed to a growing sense that they were fighting a war against an industrial and technological behemoth that could simply produce its way to victory. The M1 Garand became a symbol of this power. It wasn't as terrifying as a heavy bomber or as intimidating as a column of Sherman tanks, but it was a far more personal and persistent threat. It was in the hands of every enemy soldier they encountered, a constant reminder of the advantage they faced in every firefight, in every contested village, and on every mountainside. The initial German belief that this complex weapon might be a flaw, a delicate instrument unsuited for the rigors of war, had been completely shattered. In its place was a grudging respect and a deep-seated understanding that the quiet engineer from Springfield Armory had armed his nation's soldiers with a tool that had fundamentally and permanently tilted the infantry duel in their favor. The whispers had become a roar, and the message was clear. Fighting the American infantryman meant fighting the Garand. Section 6. Rewriting the rules of engagement, fire, and maneuver. The introduction of the M1 Garand was more than a simple upgrade of equipment. It was a catalyst that fundamentally reshaped American infantry doctrine. For generations, the core tactical problem for infantry had remained the same: how to cross open ground under enemy fire. The traditional solution, refined in the First World War, was the concept of fire and movement. This involved a heavy, crew-served machine gun laying down a base of suppressive fire to pin the enemy in place, while a separate element of riflemen maneuvered to a more advantageous position. It was a sound theory, but it had a critical weakness. It was entirely dependent on the machine gun. The machine gun was the linchpin. It was heavy, required a crew of several soldiers to operate effectively, and its position could be easily identified by the enemy, making it a primary target. If the machine gun was knocked out or forced to relocate, the maneuvering element was left dangerously exposed, their advance stalled. The entire operation was centralized around a single weapon system. The M1 Garand decentralized this entire concept. It democratized suppressive fire. With a semi-automatic rifle capable of firing as fast as the soldier could pull the trigger, every single rifleman in a squad became a potential base of fire. This gave birth to a more fluid and dynamic version of the old doctrine, a tactic that became the hallmark of American infantry: fire and maneuver. The principle was simple, but its implications were profound. An American squad could now divide itself into smaller, more flexible teams. One team, perhaps just 2 or 3 soldiers, could lay down a rapid and continuous stream of fire on an enemy position. Because each soldier was armed with a Garand, their combined fire could effectively simulate that of a light machine gun, forcing the enemy to keep their heads down. This was not the slow, deliberate fire of bolt actions. It was a hail of 30.06 rounds that made movement or accurate return fire exceedingly difficult for the defenders. While this fire team kept the enemy suppressed, a second maneuver team could move. They could advance to a new position, crawl up a ditch, or work their way around a flank. Once the maneuver team was in a better position, they would then take up the role of providing suppressive fire, allowing the first team to leapfrog forward. This created a continuous, rolling advance, a relentless cycle of fire and movement that was incredibly difficult to stop. One moment, the enemy was being suppressed from the front, the next from the flank. The pressure was constant and came from multiple directions. This tactic was devastatingly effective against an opponent armed primarily with bolt-action rifles. A German squad, pinned by a Garand fire team, had very few options. Their own riflemen could not match the rate of fire to effectively counter-suppress the Americans. Their only real answer was their own machine gun, the MG-42. But this created a new problem for them. As soon as the MG-42 opened fire, it revealed its position, drawing the concentrated attention of every Garand rifleman in the American squad. 10 or 12 semi-automatic rifles, all directing their fire at a single point, could make life for a German machine gun crew exceptionally difficult, often forcing them to cease firing or risk being neutralized. The Garand effectively empowered the American squad to hunt the weapon that was the very foundation of German infantry tactics. This new doctrine had a profound effect on the individual soldier and the small unit leader. Squad leaders were no longer just directing men. They were conducting a small orchestra of firepower. They had the flexibility to split their squads, to create multiple bases of fire, and to react to changing battlefield conditions with a speed that was impossible under the old system. The individual soldier, in turn, was empowered. He was not just a cog in the machine, a single rifle supporting a larger weapon. He was an active and crucial participant in the art of suppression and maneuver. His personal weapon had a direct and immediate impact on the movement and safety of his comrades. This fostered a sense of agency and initiative at the lowest levels, a key strength of the American military. The effectiveness of this doctrine was demonstrated time and again, from the farm fields of Normandy to the forests of the Ardennes. In the dense bocage country of France, with its maze of hedgerows, fire, and maneuver, was the key to unlocking stubborn German defenses. A fire team would pour rounds into one section of a hedgerow, allowing a maneuver team to creep along a ditch and hit the position from the side. In the urban warfare of captured towns, it allowed squads to clear buildings and streets with terrifying efficiency, with one team covering from windows while another dashed across an open square. The M1 Garand did not just give the American soldier a better rifle, it gave him a better way to fight. It transformed infantry combat from a static duel of attrition into a fluid dance of violence and movement. The revolution that John Garand had started in his workshop had now fully matured on the battlefield, rewriting the rules of engagement, one 8-round clip at a time. Section 7. The signature sound and the myth of the ping. Of all the characteristics of the M1 Garand, its reliability, its power, its revolutionary semi-automatic action, none would become more famous or more debated than the sound it made when it was empty. After the 8th and final round was fired, the internal mechanism would lock open, and the steel en-bloc clip that had held the cartridges would be automatically ejected. As it was thrown clear of the rifle, it would often strike the operating rod or receiver, producing a distinctive, high-pitched metallic ping. This sound was utterly unique to the Garand. No other standard-issue rifle on the battlefield made anything like it. In the cacophony of combat, amidst the roar of explosions, the chatter of machine guns, and the crack of rifles. The Garand's ping was a clear and unambiguous acoustic signature. It was the sound of an American rifleman needing to reload. From this simple, mechanical fact, one of the most enduring and pervasive myths of the Second World War was born. The legend goes like this. Clever German soldiers learned to listen for the ping. They knew it signaled that an American soldier was momentarily vulnerable, his weapon empty. They would wait, holding their fire, until they heard that telltale sound, and in that brief window of opportunity, they would leap from their cover to attack, knowing the American was unable to shoot back. It's a compelling story. It speaks to the intelligence and adaptability of the German soldier and highlights what seems to be a critical design flaw in an otherwise superior weapon. The image of a soldier being undone by the very sound of his own rifle's emptiness is filled with a certain dramatic irony. For decades after the war, this story was repeated by veterans, historians, and firearms enthusiasts, becoming an accepted piece of battlefield lore. However, the overwhelming consensus of modern historical analysis and the testimony of countless combat veterans from both sides suggests that this tactical ping exploitation is almost entirely a myth. The reality of a small unit firefight was simply far too chaotic for such a tactic to be practical or effective. First, consider the noise. A battlefield is an incredibly loud place. The sheer volume of fire from other rifles, machine guns, and mortars, combined with shouting and explosions, would often be more than enough to drown out the sound of a single, small piece of metal being ejected from a rifle 100 yards away. A soldier would have to be incredibly close and lucky to even hear it clearly. Second, there was never just one Garand. An American infantry squad was made up to 12 men, most of them armed with M1s. They were not firing in neat, synchronized volleys. In the heat of an engagement, soldiers were firing and reloading at different times. The sound of one rifle pinging would be immediately covered by the continuous fire from the other rifles in the squad. A German soldier waiting for a single ping would be exposing himself to the fire of 5 or 10 other Garands that were still very much loaded. It would be a suicidal tactic. Third, the reload time for the Garand was remarkably fast. A well-practiced soldier could have a fresh 8-round clip inserted and the bolt released in just a few seconds. The window of vulnerability was incredibly brief. By the time a German soldier heard the ping, registered what it was, and decided to act on it, the American soldier would likely already have his rifle back in action. Despite the tactical impracticality, the legend persisted. Why? Part of it may be due to the natural human tendency to create compelling narratives out of the chaos of war. It's a better story than the mundane reality. There are a few isolated, anecdotal accounts of soldiers claiming to have used or witnessed this tactic, but they are exceedingly rare and cannot be substantiated as a common or widespread practice. It's more likely that these are exaggerated war stories or misinterpretations of events. Some American soldiers even claim to have exploited the myth themselves, deliberately throwing an empty clip against a rock to make a pinging sound, hoping to draw an enemy soldier out of cover. While this makes for another great story, it too is likely more fiction than fact. Rather than being a tactical liability, the ping was something else entirely. It became part of the psychological landscape of the war. For American soldiers, it was the familiar and reassuring rhythm of their own firepower. For German soldiers, it was not a signal of opportunity, but a component of the terrifying cacophony of American superiority. Each ping meant that 8 rounds of .30-06 had just been sent in their direction, and that another 8 were likely on the way. The sound was not a flaw. It was a signature. It was the closing note of a short, violent, 8-round symphony, a sound that announced the presence of the American infantryman and his formidable weapon. The myth of the ping endures because it speaks to a deeper truth. that every piece of technology has its quirks, its unique characteristics that become part of its identity. For the M1 Garand, that identity was forever linked to the sharp, clear sound that marked the end of one cycle of its power and the beginning of the next. Section 8. Tested in the Crucible. From Normandy's hedgerows to the Ardennes snow. If the deserts of North Africa and the mountains of Italy were the Garand's proving grounds, then the campaigns in France and Belgium were its final, definitive examination. Here, in the final, brutal year of the war in Europe, the M1 would be tested in the most demanding and varied conditions imaginable, cementing its reputation as one of the most rugged and reliable infantry rifles ever made. In June of 1944, American forces stormed the beaches of Normandy and plunged into the treacherous terrain of the Bocage country. This was a landscape unlike any other they had faced, a patchwork of small fields and pastures, separated by ancient, dense hedgerows. These were not simple bushes, but massive earthen walls, sometimes 10 feet high, topped with thick, tangled trees and shrubs. They formed a natural fortress, a defender's paradise that the Germans expertly utilized. The fighting in the Bocage was a series of vicious, close-quarters engagements, fought from one hedgerow to the next. Visibility was often limited to less than 50 yards. This was a rifleman's fight, and the M1 Garand shone. The slow-firing bolt-action K98K was at a severe disadvantage in this environment. The ability to deliver rapid, semi-automatic fire was absolutely critical when an enemy machine gun nest or rifleman was suddenly encountered at point-blank range. An American soldier could pour an entire 8-round clip into a suspected enemy position in a matter of seconds, providing the suppressive fire needed for his comrades to toss a grenade or maneuver for a better angle. The Garand's power was also a key asset. Its M30-06 round, capable of punching through the thick foliage and light cover that characterized the hedgerows, something that lower-powered submachine gun rounds could not do effectively. The battles for every field and crossroads in Normandy were a testament to the superiority of the Garand in close-quarters infantry combat. Then came the winter of 1944 and the massive German counteroffensive in the Ardennes forest, a campaign that would become known as the Battle of the Bulge. Here, the challenge was not dense hedgerows, but the brutal, freezing cold. American units, caught by surprise, found themselves fighting desperate defensive actions in deep snow, with temperatures plummeting far below freezing. In these extreme conditions, weapons can and do fail. Lubricants freeze, metal becomes brittle, and moisture can render a complex mechanism inoperable. Many pieces of equipment struggled in the bitter cold of the Ardennes. However, the M1 Garand earned a legendary reputation for its dependability. John Garand had designed his rifle with loose tolerances, a feature sometimes criticized in peacetime as being detrimental to pinpoint accuracy, but which proved to be a godsend in combat. The generous spacing between the rifle's moving parts meant that it was less susceptible to jamming from dirt, ice, or fouling. While other, more finely tuned weapons might seize up, the Garand, with its powerful gas-operated action, would continue to cycle. Soldiers who fought in the Ardennes told stories of having to knock ice off their rifles, of weapons covered in frozen mud that would still fire and function when the trigger was pulled. This reliability was a massive morale booster for the beleaguered American troops fighting in places like Bastogne and St. Vith. In a situation where everything seemed to be going wrong, the one thing a soldier could count on was his rifle. It was a lifeline, a dependable tool in a world of chaos and uncertainty. The contrast with some of the German equipment was notable. While the K98K was also a very reliable weapon, the more complex semi-automatic rifles that the Germans had developed, like the Gewehr 43, were known to be more sensitive to harsh conditions and often failed in the extreme cold of the Ardennes. The Garand's performance across these wildly different environments, from the hot sand of Africa, to the close-in fighting of the Bocage, to the frozen forests of Belgium, demonstrated the genius of its design. It was not a specialized weapon built for a single purpose. It was a true general-purpose infantry rifle, a tool that could be counted on to perform in any climate and any tactical situation. It was accurate enough for long-range engagements, fast-firing enough for close-quarters battle, powerful enough to defeat battlefield cover, and, above all, stone-cold reliable when it mattered most. This versatility and dependability were the true hallmarks of its greatness. The rifle that John Garand had so painstakingly perfected had not just passed its final exam, it had done so with flying colors, earning the undying loyalty of the men who carried it through the toughest fighting of the war. Section 9. An arsenal for a nation and a general's highest praise. The success of the M1 Garand on the battlefield was not merely a result of its superior design. It was also a triumph of American industrial might. A revolutionary rifle is of little use if it cannot be produced in the vast quantities needed to equip a modern army. The effort to manufacture the Garand was a monumental undertaking, a testament to the nation's ability to mobilize its manufacturing base for the war effort. Initially, production was handled exclusively by the government-owned Springfield Armory, where John Garand himself had developed the rifle. However, as the United States plunged into the war and the demand for the M1 skyrocketed, it became clear that Springfield alone could not meet the need. The task of producing millions of these complex and precisely engineered rifles was immense. To meet this challenge, the U.S. government turned to private industry. The Winchester Repeating Arms Company, a legendary name in American firearms, was brought on as a second primary contractor. The engineers at Winchester had to retool their factories and learn the intricate process of building a rifle they had not designed, a significant challenge that they met with remarkable speed and efficiency. As the war progressed and the demand continued to grow, even this was not enough. The program was expanded further, with contracts being awarded to companies like Harrington and Richardson and International Harvester, a company more famous for making farm tractors than military rifles. The idea of a tractor factory churning out one of the world's most advanced infantry weapons was a powerful symbol of the arsenal of democracy at work. The production of each M1 was a complex ballet of milling, forging, and woodworking. It required high-quality steel, fine walnut for the stocks, and a workforce of skilled machinists and assemblers. In total, from 1936 to the end of the war, over 4 million M1 rifles were produced. By 1945, the bolt-action Springfield 1903 had been almost entirely phased out of frontline service, and the Garand was the unquestioned standard, from the infantryman slogging through the mud to the Marine hitting the beaches in the Pacific. This ubiquitousness was the key to its strategic impact. It wasn't just that the M1 was a good rifle. It was that everyone had one. This universal issue created a standard level of firepower across the entire army that no other nation could match. This massive achievement in production and logistics did not go unnoticed by the war's most senior leaders. Of all the accolades the M1 Garand received, none is more famous or more definitive than the one bestowed upon it by General George S. Patton, Jr. Patton was a famously demanding and often brutally critical commander. He was a man who understood the sharp end of combat, a leader who did not offer praise lightly. In a letter, he gave the rifle an endorsement that would be forever etched in history, calling the M1 Garand the greatest battle implement ever devised. This was not a casual compliment. Coming from a man like Patton, it was the highest possible praise. But what did he mean by it? It wasn't just about the rifle's rate of fire or its reliability. Patton understood that the purpose of any weapon is to empower the soldier who carries it. The Garand did this better than any other infantry tool of its time. It gave the individual soldier, the G.I. Joe, a measure of battlefield dominance. It allowed him to suppress his enemies, to protect his comrades, and to advance against fire with a confidence that a bolt-action rifle simply could not inspire. It was, in Patton's eyes, the perfect synthesis of firepower, reliability, and usability. It was a tool that magnified the effectiveness of the common soldier. And in a war that was ultimately won by millions of common soldiers, this was the most important quality a weapon could possess. The soldiers who carried it shared this sentiment, though they often expressed it in simpler terms. They called it their Garand, their M1, or sometimes, affectionately, their Pinger. They cleaned it, cared for it, and trusted it with their lives. They appreciated its solid, reassuring weight of 9.5 pounds and its 110-centimeter length. They knew its every quirk and feature. For them, it wasn't just a battle implement. It was a constant companion through the most harrowing experiences of their lives. The combination of a brilliant design, a massive industrial effort, and the validation of soldiers and generals alike cemented the M1's place in history. It was a weapon that had not only lived up to its promise, but had exceeded all expectations. A true war winner that armed a nation and earned the ultimate respect of those who used it to achieve victory. Section 10. The Enduring Echo, a Legacy in Steel and Doctrine. When the Great Conflict finally drew to a close in 1945, the guns fell silent, but the legacy of the M1 Garand was only just beginning. It had emerged from the war not just as a successful piece of military hardware, but as an icon, a symbol of American victory and technological ingenuity. For millions of returning veterans, the solid feel of its walnut stock and the distinctive ping of its empty clip were among the most vivid sensory memories of their service. Unlike many weapons that are quickly retired after a major war, the Garand's story was far from over. The rifle remained the standard-issue service weapon for the United States Armed Forces for more than a decade after the war's end. It was carried by a new generation of American soldiers into the frozen hills and harsh mountain terrain of the Korean War. There, it once again proved its worth in long-range engagements across the deep valleys, where its powerful .30-06 cartridge was a significant advantage over the weapons used by opposing forces. It served through the early stages of the Cold War, a period of global tension where the readiness and effectiveness of the infantryman were paramount. It was finally, officially replaced in U.S. service in 1957 by the M14 rifle, a weapon that was itself a direct descendant of the Garand, sharing a very similar action and design philosophy. But even retirement did not end its service. Millions of surplus M1s were distributed to allies of the United States around the world as part of military aid programs. The Garand became the standard rifle for the armies of nations like South Korea, Greece, Italy, the Philippines, and many others. It continued to serve in regional conflicts and counterinsurgency campaigns for decades, a testament to its enduring reliability and effectiveness. Its influence extends far beyond its own service life. The M1 Garand is widely considered the direct ancestor of the modern main battle rifle. John Garand's robust gas-operated rotating bolt system became a benchmark for rifle design. Its principles can be seen in countless subsequent firearms, including the M14, the Russian AK-47, and many other successful designs. It proved, on a global scale, the viability and necessity of a semi-automatic rifle for the general infantryman, a concept that is now the absolute standard for every modern army in the world. John Garand's vision of empowering every soldier with rapid, reliable firepower had become the new orthodoxy. Today, the M1 Garand holds a revered place in the culture of firearms and military history. It is highly sought after by collectors and civilian marksmen for its historical significance, its fine craftsmanship, and its exceptional accuracy. Firing a Garand at a rifle range is, for many, a way of connecting with a pivotal moment in history, of feeling the same sturdy recoil and hearing the same iconic ping that was so familiar to a generation of soldiers. The legacy of the M1 Garand is therefore threefold. First, it is a legacy of technological innovation. It was a revolutionary design that solved a decades-old engineering challenge, creating the world's first successful standard-issue semi-automatic rifle. Second, it is a legacy of tactical transformation. It fundamentally changed the way infantry squads fight, enabling the fluid and effective fire and maneuver doctrine that gave American forces a decisive edge. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, it is a human legacy. It is the story of a quiet inventor who dedicated his life to a single, brilliant idea. It is the story of the industrial might of a nation that built millions of these rifles. And above all, it is the story of the millions of soldiers who carried it into harm's way, who trusted it, and who relied upon it to see them through. The rifle General Patton called the greatest battle implement ever devised did more than just dominate firefights. It shaped the course of history and left an enduring echo that can still be heard in the design of modern armies and in the sharp, metallic ping of a piece of history being enjoyed on a peaceful rifle range.